Hello and welcome back to the Week in Nintendo right here on GVG. I'm your host again this week, Steve Bowling, and it is so good to see you. I don't feel like we have a ton to talk about this week because we've been dominated by one thing and one thing only, and that is the release and the leaks about Pokemon Legends ZA. Obviously, the Switch 2 edition has just come out. Otherwise, there isn't a ton of news in the Nintendo world. This just tends to happen when first-party games release, so I'm going to spend this episode mostly talking about my time with ZA so far, my limited impressions from the game now that I've got a few hours in, as well as just briefly touch on the whole Pokemon Teraleak extended leak situation. And then we're going to get to some viewer questions. If you don't know, we have a mailbag that we usually do. We've just brought it back in time for this new reboot of the Week in Nintendo. So I hope you guys enjoy what we have planned ahead. Real quick, before we get to any of those topics, I want to discuss Plants vs. Zombies Replanted just dropped a new trailer that shows off Switch 2 specific features like playing over game share and PvE. PvP. This looks like a really fun time. John will be covering that on the channel whenever he's able to get his hands on the game and cover it. I know that he's really enthusiastic about that one. I didn't know he was a Plants vs. Zombies guy, but there you go. But anyway, let's go ahead and start talking about the Teraleak, because that was probably the biggest news story in Pokemon, in Nintendo, all week, might be for the rest of the year even. Basically, if you're unaware, Game Freak and Nintendo, they were hacked quite a while ago, over a year at this point. And I'm not going to pretend to understand the ins and outs of why data comes out, this far after. I assume it's because hackers end up decrypting data or figuring out how to decrypt encrypted files. And then they, put those out on the internet. So this week, a bunch of Game Freak files made their way onto the internet. People were posting screenshots and videos of unreleased games or development builds, even of Pokemon Legends ZA. Now, we're obviously not going to show you any of those. We don't want any of the smoke from the Pokemon company's lawyers. And frankly, it's just kind of a messed up thing to do. Leaks in and of themselves are interesting. Like, as a gamer, I love seeing, unfinished games or concepts that never left production, stuff like that. I love that kind of behind the scenes insight into games. And if I could, I would consume them ethically, but there's no ethical way to consume these. These are stolen files. But they showed off an interesting amount of information as far as what Game Freak has planned for the future, or at least what they did have planned for the future a year ago. Obviously, game development is a very fluid type of thing. Things change all the time. And you can see that if you saw any of the leaked videos from builds of Legends ZA, you can obviously see that quite a bit changed during development there. There were also, the names for Gen 10 came out. There were other unannounced Pokemon games that got revealed this way. Who knows if any of those are still in production? Any one of those could have been canceled or changed, and there were a lot of internal personnel files and emails and stuff, just very uncool things to have floating out there. Obviously, TPCI and Nintendo's lawyers got right on this and wiped those from the internet. So they're pretty much gone now. But what was there was quite interesting and quite telling of how game development works and the kinds of changes and compromises one needs to make during these processes. But this is the kind of stuff that also really ruins plans. As somebody who loves to see these games pop up in a direct or somewhere like that, it can be kind of deflating to hear about them this far in advance. There are some games that are almost certainly coming that would have been much bigger surprises had they been announced. However, Pokemon wanted to announce them, and there were others that I don't know if they'll even see the light of day, but I certainly hope they do, because the concepts behind them really appeal to me personally. And yeah, I think that there's merit in it's cool to see some of these things, but it's not really cool the way they became visible in the first place. So for that reason, I'm not really going to go into too much detail on any of the stuff that was seen in those leaks. If you know where to look, you'll probably find it, but I'm not going to show you. So I want to take most of this episode and just talk about Legends ZA, because I finally have it. I've been playing it. I didn't get it early. Nobody, at GVG got an early copy of it, but we've been having, there's an interesting debate online about this game, and I said this on Twitter the other day, that I find review scores that are all over the place to be a bit more interesting than just a series of 9s or 10s or even 6s or 5s. When every outlet agrees on the quality of a game, it's pretty easy to say like, oh, this is going to be, either a good game or a bad game or somewhere in between. But when you see 10s and 9s and then 5s and 6s, to me, that is a much more interesting proposition, because I want to dive in and see if I'm a 10 or a 9 or a 5 or a 6, or who knows, right there in the middle. That to me tells me that rather than look at these reviews, I'd rather form my own opinion after playing this game, after diving in and taking a look and figuring out exactly what I like and what I don't like. And so I've approached Legends ZA kind of trepidatiously. I've been looking at it as, I want to play this game as casually as I can while still keeping a critical eye on it. And there are certainly things even early in that I really enjoy, and things that I find kind of disappointing that have let me down a bit. And I'm going to try to weave between those concepts as I talk to you about my experiences with the game so far. I have gotten to the point in the game where I can finally use Mega Evolution, but I'm not very far in. So basically what I've played encompasses the PAX demo that I played a while back, as well as everything before that and the moments that connect those segments. If you've never played like a show floor demo of a game, what you might not be aware of is that usually they're just chunks, right? Like we don't get to just sit in front of a game and play it for like 20 minutes uninterrupted. It's usually like, hey, here's a little 5 to 10 minute segment. Then we're going to take control and move you to a different save file. And then you play 10 minutes of this, and we're going to kind of guide you through it. It's going to be a very linear portion of the game. That's not every demo, but it is very often the case. Famously Breath of the Wild, they just handed us the controller and they're like, go wherever you want. And I thought that was really cool because I got killed almost immediately. But in this case, I've played through, a couple ranking battles. I've played through most of the mechanics of the game. I don't think there are any left that haven't been revealed to me yet, though, please no spoilers. I'm not as far in the game as some of you are, I'm sure. So let's talk about the core mechanics of the game, right? Because at its heart, Legends ZA is a new take on Pokemon, even different from Arceus, right? Arceus had those two styles in combat, but it was still mostly kind of turn-based, whereas Legends ZA is full-on real-time Pokemon battles. And all of your Pokemon's moves have cooldowns, and based on their strength, they might have a longer cooldown. But you're juggling both the position of your Pokemon, because they can just straight up dodge by getting out of the way. You're also managing when they can do their moves. And you can even go as far as juggling Pokemon. Like when your Pokemon has a move on cooldown, you can swap out for another party member, have them do a move, bring them back in, swap them out. It can get quite intense and quite complicated pretty quickly. And I love that. I didn't know how I was going to feel, about the earlier part of the game, because in the demos I played, it was a bit easy, and admittedly, it still kind of is. As long as you go to the wild areas and you continue to level up your Pokemon, you're really not going to have an issue with battles, right? Of course, this all extends to, if you know your type advantages and everything like that. Pokemon has never been a truly difficult series, at least not in the story part of the game. Really, the competition comes from playing against others, right? And I would say that this continues that trend, at least early on. Battles are very simple. If you know what to use against whom, then you're able to do it. But I will say that I really enjoy the fact that these battles happen much more quickly. It feels like, I'm not able to say, oh, my opponent is going to pull out a Pikachu. Who in my party can handle that? They're just throwing out that Pikachu, and I'm having to react then and move as quickly as I can. So it behooves you to kind of know your party, know your moves, because you're not going to have time to think about what you want to do. You're just going to have to do it. And I think that is one of the cooler things. Now, of course, you can level up one of your Pokemon like crazy and just become super OP and take out anything. Type advantages be damned. And I will admit I've done a little bit of that. I went with Tepig, and I've just kind of been able to steamroll most of the other Pokemon I encounter in the story. But when you start talking about alpha Pokemon in the wild area, then you can definitely find, or in the wild zones, you can find some difficulty there if you go looking for it. I mentioned in my preview from Paris or was it from PAX? In one of my previews, I mentioned that I had encountered like a very high level Houndoom, at least comparatively to my party, as well as an Alpha Pikachu in the same area. That turns out that's Wild Zone 6. You can find them there yourself. And I was given like a preloaded party of really good Pokemon, whereas I didn't have the ability to compete with these guys very fairly through my own playthrough so far. I kind of rushed in there not remembering, and then got in a fight where my back was against the wall pretty badly. And I really enjoyed the challenge of having to defeat and try to capture those two. I was able to get Alpha Pikachu. Alpha Houndoom still eludes me, but I will keep at it. And in those moments, I'm really loving this game. I'm having so much fun just in the core gameplay loop of like, go to a wild zone, catch Pokemon, sneak up on them, get in fights, that stuff is so good. And it is my favorite way to experience kind of the Pokemon battle system. This is what I want. I want this kind of battle system to continue to exist. I still want traditional turn-based Pokemon battles, especially in core mainline games. I don't want that to go away, but I also want this to coexist alongside it. I don't want Game Freak to just have Legend ZA be a one-off. I think the mechanics of these games are such a breath of fresh air from, playing decades of traditional turn-based Pokemon that I'm really happy to see this. I'm getting more and more of what I want from a Pokemon spin-off series with each iteration of Legends. Legends Arceus brought Pokemon out in the wild to where I could just catch them with Pokeballs. Now I've got this plus a real-time combat system, and I have to say I'm just really pleased mechanically with how this game works. But I do have to talk about things that I'm unhappy with as well. Obviously, Legend ZA is not a looker, at least from an environmental perspective. Let's be clear, character models, Pokemon models, they're good. Like they're good enough. I like them. I think everything looks fine, if a bit sterile, and I'll come back to that. But environments are straight up not good. So, there's been no shortage of posts on social media about how, I don't want to say poor, but how undetailed specifically buildings are in Legend ZA. They're flat boxes with textures on them, and it feels a bit like they could have done a bit more here. My guess, and of course, I'm never going to know the answer to this, but my guess is that this was done to get the game running well on Switch 1. Switch 2 could definitely handle more architecture than this. It could handle some depth on the actual outer structures, but given that this is a Switch 2 edition and not a game built from the ground up for the Switch 2, I have to imagine that Game Freak, given how poorly previous Pokemon games have run, really focused on performance for this one. They didn't want to have another game that was routinely dropping into the high teens, low 20s. And so they may have gone a bit overboard with paring back geometry. But that's just a guess on my part. Obviously, I have no idea. But what I can say is that I'm quite happy with how the game runs on Switch 1. It runs far better than I expected. During all of my previews, I never really got to see Legend ZA running on Switch 1 hardware. Like, to give you an idea, there were no Switch 1s in any of the rooms I played ZA in at any point pre-release. So this was something where I was really excited to see that it actually runs quite well. There was no reason to worry here. Pokemon Legends ZA, if you have a Switch 1 and only a Switch 1, I'd still recommend it. Do I think it's perfect? Obviously not. But do I think it's as disastrous as previous Pokemon games? Again, certainly not. Like it's a thoroughly playable version of the game. Obviously, it's not going to look or run as good as it does on Switch 2, but I also think that because they made it so undemanding that it'll be acceptable on Nintendo's original hardware. So give it a shot if you haven't. You might be surprised, or just look up some videos. There's tons of them online by the time we're making this episode of the podcast live, and I'll probably have some footage on screen for you to check out as well. So Outside of environments, there are a few other things that kind of bug me about this. First off, there's the music, and this is my fault, I'm going to admit, but I learned that there was basically one track in Lumio City, and while I was working the day that the game came out, I just had the game in the background because I would turn around every so often, play a bit more, and that song just kind of drilled into my head. And I realized that this is super repetitive after a while, and I didn't want to hear it anymore. Fortunately, Brandon pointed out that you can just turn the music down in the options, which I haven't done because I don't think that that's necessarily fair. But I think that it's a good song. It just kind of wears out after a while. I like the new battle theme. I like all of the tracks in the soundtrack, but I think you could have found a way to maybe vary up the music a bit. And then finally, and I don't know if this is because the game runs so well on Switch 2, but I'm noticing for the first time just kind of how, I guess the best word would be sterile, the character models feel in Pokemon. This is a continuation of the 3D style that they've been using since they started making 3D Pokemon games, but I feel like now that it's in a very high resolution and performance is no longer an issue on the Switch 2, I'm just noticing how, everything feels a bit off production-wise in terms of the fact that more than any other Pokemon game, I feel like ZA is aimed at young children. And I don't know that that was intentional, but it gives off that vibe. The fact that characters don't talk in cutscenes, despite the fact that their mouths are moving, the fact that, expressions look pretty much the same on different faces, different characters, like, the smile animation from one character to the next looks kind of just like an animation that they copy and paste over several different characters, where their eyes and mouth move exactly the same way. Like everybody has the exact same toothy smile in Legends ZA. Stuff like that kind of points to me that, they know that their audience is much younger than most of us. And I don't think that that's necessarily true. I think it might be who they're angling for. But it's not indicative of the entire audience, right? Like I've been playing Pokemon since I was in high school. A lot of people I know have been, I don't have a lot of friends outside of my kids that are under the age of 18. In fact, I don't have any that aren't my kids. And my kids don't seem very interested in Legends ZA. But a lot of the adults I know are. So I feel like maybe there's a bit of a disconnect here between the people who are buying this game and the people that the game seems to be designed for. Like a lot of simple things, like you'll see a character run, into another area. And then when you get there, they'll zoom the camera over to show the character's like, 20 steps away to let you know so you don't forget where they are. There are a lot of times that ZA gates you, like you have to chase like a Pokemon or something, and you are not allowed to go off that beaten path. Or if you go too far away from an objective, your Rotom phone will pop up and tell you, you need to go back here. And I was kind of hoping for a bit more of an open experience where I would be able to go around and, get Pokemon and do stuff and not be told where to go constantly. It feels a bit like they're just trying to keep children from losing focus and keep them on task, basically not trusting the player. So how, after saying all that, do I still like this game? And I guess the answer is, while I'm nowhere near ready to give a verdict on Legends ZA, what I can say is this: it is still an incredibly good time. Like the core gameplay loop of just catching and battling Pokemon is stronger than I think it's ever been. And to me, that's what really matters. And in the face of how much fun I'm having doing that, these other issues with the game just kind of fall away. I still really enjoy what I'm doing. And I think that that is both good and a problem, because I want to see Pokemon do more. I want to see these games feel a bit more fleshed out. I want to feel that I'm playing a game that belongs to the most valuable single IP on the face of the earth. And I don't get that feeling, but I'm happy to see that Game Freak is at least improving, that things are moving in a positive direction in terms of both performance and visual fidelity. And I'm confident that when they finally drop the Switch 1 as a platform and start producing Pokemon games that are solely destined for the Switch 2, that we will see a decent leap in both visuals and performance, if not presentation. Presentation doesn't need better hardware. It just needs a more mature approach in terms of, trusting the player to stay on task when they want to and giving them a bit more freedom. Obviously, this is something that has plagued other Nintendo franchises in the past, and they've found their way around it. So I'm hopeful that we will get our Pokemon Breath of the Wild moment at some point where we are just allowed to roam free in a big open Pokemon world and battle trainers and do other things and just go do the story objectives when we feel like doing them. But this isn't that game. And that's not necessarily a terrible thing because, like I said, I'm still having loads of fun. I'll be back next week with a full-on update on, everything I feel. Maybe we'll put together a discussion. Let me know if you'd like me and Daniel or Brandon or somebody who is playing Pokemon Legends ZA to do a more, thoughtful, critical discussion on the game. But those are my quick thoughts after just a handful of hours. I'm really enjoying it. I'd love to hear from you guys if you're enjoying it as well. Speaking of you guys, it is time for our mailbag. If you're unaware, you can head to patreon.com/gvgaming, where for as little as $5 a month, you can get access to each and every episode of The Win in audio form a day before it goes live on any other platform. And you get to submit questions to our mailbag, which we're going to go through right now. First up, we have Natalie for 64DD, who writes, with the Kirby Air Riders Direct still needing to happen, do you think the game has any big secrets yet to be shown? We still haven't even gotten a look at the main menu, so what do you think they could be hiding? Top ride, story mode, something totally new? And I could be misquoting here, Natalie, but I believe that we were told that there is more to show for this game, that there are more modes were hinted at. So I'm not the biggest Kirby Air Ride person. I didn't really like the original game on GameCube. And I'm not 100% on the, Switch 2 game coming up here. I'll have to wait till someone else plays it and tells me what they think. But I would imagine that we're at least going to get feature parity with the original GameCube version. So if there are modes from that aren't available in the Switch 2 edition or that haven't been shown yet on the new Switch 2 game, then I imagine that we'll get those. I think that there's more to the game. I think Nintendo is threading the needle with this one quite a bit. And it's very interesting to me because I think Kirby Air Riders is still going to be a niche game. And it feels like maybe that this is something that they're giving it the hype they're giving because there is a small but loyal fan base to it, but also just out of deference and respect to and respect for Masahiro Sakurai, who obviously, they want to keep their Smash Maker happy. And maybe this was something that he just truly wanted to do. But it does feel almost as though it has like an outsized marketing push for a game that's probably not going to have a huge impact. Like I'm not expecting it to be a massive release for Nintendo. I'm expecting it to definitely win over a small but very hardcore dedicated group of fans. I just don't see it being as big of a game as maybe, people might think it is based on the marketing behind it. But yeah, definitely we're going to get more information on the game in the Air Riders Direct, which has to be happening really soon. And then we'll see what we get from there. But thank you for the question. Now, we have a couple different flavors of this. So Amber Coaster Egg for Dreamcast, and then a couple others kind of talked about this. But this is the question. With the first year of the Switch 2 about half done, what are your thoughts about its launch year so far? We do have a discussion coming up on something like this for the channel, so stay tuned for that. I'm not in it, so you can get my opinion now. We're about 5 months into the Switch 2's life, 4.5 or so now, just over 4. And it's been an interesting year. Obviously, there were some price complaints, and I think that people were really, bothered. Like there was a lot of negativity around the Switch launch, which I found to be very interesting, because as far as I'm concerned, the Switch is one of the best pieces of gaming the Switch 2 is one of the best pieces of gaming hardware ever produced. And I mean that from a hardware perspective. When you look at the Switch 2, it is a very impressive piece of kit. Nintendo has crammed so much power into this thing. And you've got DLSS, 2 flavors of it apparently, and we're seeing games that just frankly reignite that feeling of impossibility, that feeling of kind of magic when you play them, right? I think some of the wow factor for the Switch is gone. Like, I don't look at Mario Kart and go, whoa, the way I used to, right? But when I look at games like Street Fighter 6, and they are, especially in handheld mode, virtually indistinguishable from the PS5 port. When I look at games like Cyberpunk 2077 running on this thing, I'm just deeply impressed by what they've managed to pull off. Star Wars Outlaws, with hardware-based ray tracing, it just feels like we're in an era in which Nintendo really, really cares about power again. And that's a nice place to be. I think that the Switch 2 is doing well. I think that a lot of people, despite the negativity and despite the pricing around it, it's in a weird place where, back in June, everybody was really upset by the $500 price or the $450 without a game. And then the rest of gaming went up in price around the Switch 2, making it feel much lower by comparison at this point. We've got a $1,000 Xbox handheld out on the market now. We have the PS5 Pro getting up there. We have an $800 Xbox Series X, and so the Switch coming in at half the cost of some of these, less than half of a competing handheld, it really kind of shifts the perspective in my mind a bit and makes me feel like we got a pretty good deal on Nintendo's hardware. Would I like all of gaming to be cheaper? Of course. Who wouldn't? But we have a really great value proposition in the Switch 2 now. And I feel like we keep getting kind of these really cool releases from Nintendo that are almost indicative of years gone by. Like, I feel like we're almost in our GameCube era in a weird way, where we launched with a Mario Kart game, which is just not really heard of. And then instead of like a Pokemon, a Legend of Zelda or anything, we got Donkey Kong Bonanza. And then we've had just amazing indies. We've had Silksong, we've had Hades 2, and sure, those are on everything, but they're really great to play on Switch. Then we have coming out, we just got Pokemon Legends ZA. We have Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment coming soon. We have Metroid Prime 4 coming in December. It feels like this is a great year for the Switch 2, and we're only going to be halfway done with the first year by the time we get Metroid Prime 4. So to think of, if Nintendo keeps up this release cadence, and I think they will to a degree, we're going to have a lot more to talk about as the year goes on. We're going to have Tomodachi Life and stuff like that, but there's a lot we don't. 2026 is largely a question mark. We have other big third-party titles that are set to come this year, which I'll be talking about in a bit because I peeked ahead in the mailbag. So I think that as launch years go, while I wouldn't put this among like the greatest of all time, because I think that Switch 1 certainly could be in that conversation just due to having had Breath of the Wild on its very first day on the market, I do think that we have a ton of really great games that have been coming out, and I've had a reason to pick up my Switch nearly every week since I got the system. And that's a really great position to be in, where Nintendo is providing enough content for this system to keep players in the ecosystem for as long as possible. And I don't know about you, but my social media feeds have been dominated lately with people picking up the Switch 2. Like, I see pictures of people just saying, oh, I finally got it. I finally got it. Every day I see another person who picked it up. And that type of anecdotal evidence tells me that Nintendo's release strategy seems to be working and that this year is going very well for them. In fact, we had a report that I think Nintendo is planning on producing something like 25 million Switch 2s for its first year on market, which is just absolutely bonkers. That is a ton of consoles, ton of hardware. So if they are able to actually meet those targets and sell that hardware, they're going to have a great first year. So yeah, I think as far as, from a consumer's perspective, from a player's perspective, I personally am very happy with the hardware. I think it's amazing. So it is my, it immediately made my Switch 1 feel like a relic, and I don't have any desire to go back to it. So thank you so much, those of you that asked that question about the Switch's first year, because we had a few people asking that, oddly enough. Let's move on to Tuxbox360, who writes, what's the lowdown on Switch 2 accessories now that we've had some time with the system? Any favorite grips, attachments, skins, etc.? So I'm going to be quite vanilla on this, and I'm going to ask all of you where you land as well. I don't like skins. I don't like, third-party accessories very much at all. I don't use grips. I think the Switch 2 feels fine as is. So realistically, my favorite accessories for my Switch 2 are, I have a Belkin case that I throw it in when I travel. I like it because it has a spot for an air tag, so I won't lose my Switch. Fun story. My best friend actually lost his Switch launch model on an airplane because he put it in the overhead bin and then forgot. And he didn't have an air tag or any tracker in his case. So after he told me that, I basically bought every case for every console I had with an air tag pocket so that I would never lose them. Outside of that, the only other third-party accessory I use is just a glass screen protector for my Switch 2, which I bought from a Japanese company called Monster. I really like all of their products. Their glass looks really nice. No, they don't pay me. They don't even know I exist. But I've been using them for everything ever since I first got their cover glass for the PlayStation Portal. It's just really good stuff. So those would be my two recommendations, but the best Switch 2 accessory is obviously the Pro Controller 2. And I think everybody who's watching knows that. So I'm just going to leave it at that. Get yourself a Pro Controller 2 if you just got a Switch or you don't have one. Best accessory you could get for it. And if you have a case, put an air tag in it. It's worth it. That's a $450 console. But thank you so much for the question. So now we've got two left. One from Denim McJeans, who writes, are you guys excited for Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment? I feel like we've already had a Zelda Warriors fill as is, and worried again that the story will be not really canon like Age of Calamity. You and I share this worry. But one thing that gives me that kind of gives me hope, I'll say, is that Nintendo has said repeatedly that this is canon. And I know that they did something similar for Age of Calamity, but realistically, when you play Age of Calamity, if you've played the story all the way through, there's no way it can be canon. So I'm not sure how to feel about this. I think that there are some potential pitfalls here. I think that Koei Tecmo likes to write crazy ass stories and put OCs in them and stuff like that. And I don't know if we're going to see any of that. Hopefully Nintendo had them rein that in a bit. I hope we're not seeing too many OCs. We already know that there's like a character in the game that is quite mysterious that looks to be a stand-in for Link, like has a mantle or has like a cloak, has a sword, probably fights in a very similar way to Link, though canonically there's no real way for Link to have been in this game. So I have some theories based on that. If you've played Tears of the Kingdom and you've 100%ed it, you might know what theory I have. I'll just leave it at that. But I mean, at the core of it, this is going to be an awesome game. The only reason that I ever had anything negative to say about Age of Calamity was because it ran really, really poorly on the Switch 1. And I don't think we're going to have that issue. I've not played Age of Calamity. I think John has at Gamescom. But I have heard nothing but good things about it from people who have. I'm very excited to play it. I'm a huge Zelda head. I've already pre-ordered the treasure box from Japan. This is a game that I absolutely have to play. And I love Warriors games. I've loved them for a very long time. So for me, this is an easy pickup. But I don't think it'll be canon at the end of the day. I think there will be too much crazy stuff in the story for it to really be canon. But the idea of exploring the imprisoning war and having that battle and the idea of Link not being there are both really appealing concepts to me. So I hope they land the story, but I know they're going to nail the gameplay. So either way, I'm here for it. But thank you so much. And finally, for our last question of this week, Fangs for the Sega Nomad writes, there are several major Switch 2 port releases, Elden Ring, Crossworlds, and Dreamlight Valley, for example, that are still dated as a nebulous 2025 release window. Do you think the final dates for these games will be Twitter drops at the TGAs or even a potential partner direct? So TGAs meaning the Game Awards in December. The Game Awards feels like a particularly poor place to do a release date reveal, because if you're revealing the release date for something at the Game Awards, That means if it's still coming out in 2025, you have a couple weeks. Ideally, from a marketing perspective, you really want to get those dates out in front of people before Black Friday, because a lot of people do their holiday shopping in late November, not mid-December. Also, a lot of, people are strapped for cash after buying gifts for the holidays for people. It's just really not a good time to tell people about something that you want them to spend money on. The alternative route is a shadow drop, but I can't see Elden Ring, Sonic Crossworlds, or Disney Dreamlight Valley being a shadow drop at the Game Awards either. Like, those are too big to just be like available now. So my guess would be that if we're going as far as the Game Awards, they're getting delayed. That would be my guess, is that if you're announcing a release date in December, it's probably not coming out till 2026. Elden Ring, from what I understand at more recent appearances, has been looking a lot better, a lot more optimized. When I played it at PAX West, it had a lot of trouble. It was not running very well. But optimization is something that happens towards the end of game development. So I don't really feel like that's, a damning statement. And like I said, people who have played later builds seem to be impressed with how it's running. So I'm hopeful that Bandai Namco can get Elden Ring into, much better shape than when I played it, when it does release. But if we don't hear a release date by, early November to mid-November, then I'd say we're probably in trouble. There could be a partner direct anytime, and I don't know when that would happen, but I'm very curious about what the future holds for those three titles in particular. I do think Elden Ring will hit 2025. I feel like Bandai Namco has really been on it with Switch 2 development. They've been doing a really good job. Unless they are just having more trouble optimizing than they expected, then maybe they'll push it to early 2026. But when you push into early 2026, you're up against Final Fantasy in January. And that is a huge release that I can tell you from having played it twice now is very well optimized. So the comparisons between FF7 Remake and an Elden Ring that isn't perfectly optimized will not be friendly. It's also just a really hard game to want to release something against. I think Final Fantasy will get a lot of attention on Switch 2, a lot of positive press. And so I can't imagine that they're going to want to really go to war with that game. In a similar way to how other developers move stuff out of the way for GTA, I think some devs might not want to push their game right up against FF7 Remake. So, I think we'll get those before the end of this year. I don't think we'll get them as late as the Game Awards, though. How we'll get them is anybody's guess. And with that, my friends, that is the end of This Week in Nintendo. Thank you guys so much for listening. If you're on, one of our audio-only platforms, or watching if you're here on YouTube. Again, if you'd like to get more out of the week in Nintendo, you can join our Winner's Circle over at patreon.com/gvgaming for as little as $5 a month to get each episode a day early, as well as being able to submit questions like the ones I just answered to our mailbag. I hope you guys are happy, safe, and healthy wherever you are, and I'll see you next time right here on the Week in Nintendo.